All right. Okay. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to everyone. Welcome. Welcome to Connect Africa. We are here again. We have been doing this, a series of discussion on the US Africa Summit. So we have now, this is like our roundup, the summary. We are again joined by our family, our brother, Pan-Africanist Kwame Gonza. Welcome, Kwame.
Thank you so much, Mahlet. Greetings to everyone who's watching us. Thank you for having me on this program today. And as always, we have come to deliberate about the issues that concern our continent. And as Mahlet has mentioned, the US Africa Summit has been of great concern to us. We need to pay attention to these events when they are happening. Like we mentioned earlier, that if the Berlin Conference, had happened when Africans were aware and they discussed it, probably they would not have come to colonize Africa and divide it. We would have been alert by the time these colonizers, would have come to the continent, and we would have been ready to fight them and push them back. So that is why when conferences like these, summits like these are happening, we need to pay close attention. So I give back the microphone to Mahlet. Mahlet, you have muted yourself. Okay.
Yes, I have been trying to unmute myself. Yeah, as Kwame said, indeed, it has been a great concern for us. We have, I think this is our fourth or fifth series of discussion. We have analyzed the summit, to whose side, to whose benefit it is. We have also, meaning pre-summit, we have also analyzed the events, major events that happened during the 3 days summit. We are coming here to do the summary and what kind of lesson as an African, looking at from the Pan-African perspective of the issues that happened during this summit, what Africa can take as a lesson, that is our major focus for today. If it is a research, so we have done the preliminary, the introduction part or the hypothesis, then we did, the field research during the summit. Now this is a suggestion and recommendation part. So for today, as I said, the focus is to round up, but of course we are not going to touch each and everything that happened. We take, in order to give, sorry, to take a lesson, we raise like 3 or 4 major issues, so that, whether they are positive or negative, so that we can learn from it what Africa can learn and what is the way forward for it. Having said that, let me start, in this discussion, just for you to follow, up. It will be nice to introduce some of the subjects. We will touch upon Ethiopia, Ghana, meaning in terms of what happened, or meaning / the leaders. Sometimes it's really difficult, to separate between the two: Ethiopia, Ghana, DRC, and those left out countries during the summit. What should be done? So we will give our suggestions here. So kicking off the first question, let me say this: for the past 2 years, actually, to be exact, from 2020, beginning of November, until beginning of 2022, again, beginning of November, there was an Eastern African country who has been alienated from the region, sanctioned by the US, and then the West, of course, it's a US-led West, as we like to call it here at Connect Africa, sanctioned and again denied funding and loan by the Western countries, and then by the so-called international organizations, but we know who they are. And then particularly the leader of this country has been demonized as hell, accused of genocide in the country. And then, he has faced as well. I'm separating now the leader from the country because it has, they have targeted specifically on him. So the West has ganged up, I can say, against this country and leader, and even the citizens of these Western countries have been told to that point to leave the country in the name of the armed rebel group that the US sponsors, which the US, without shamelessly says it, the armed, in the name of the armed group, going to control the country, and then you have to leave the country. And then this rebel group has been sponsored. The US and international organization have been its spokesperson. All this, in 2 years. But then, so this leader was one of the invitees of the 49 countries to the US Africa Summit, and he has defied everything that has been said, against him and against the people that he lead. And that person that I'm talking about is Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, who kind of shined in this summit. Now, what can the other African countries can learn from what has been done and how he carried out the chaos, the conflict that happened in the country, and how that was turned around. Don't get me wrong, please. There are still things that's going on, conflicts in the country, but the major things that has been going on for the 2 years have been ended with a peace deal. With the principle of African solution to African problems. Now, what can Africa learn the way Ethiopia has been in this summit? So Kwame, back to you. I just wanted to give a background to the audience.
Yeah, thank you very much for the background. You put, so succinctly and eloquently, of course. There's a lot of lessons to learn from this summit and how it happened. If you look at the players, there were two players, the United States and Africa, and the various stakeholders on the African continent. Before, I think that we can learn from what happened at this summit, I think it is necessary for us to look at the first summit that happened. I think it is in 2014 under President Barack Obama. It is either 2014
August 2014. You are right.
Absolutely. So it is important for us to look at the commitments that were made during the first summit that was organized by President Barack Obama, and see those commitments, were they fulfilled, and if we see that those commitments were fulfilled, and the investments which were pledged were made, then we should not be worried about what is happening in this summit. The lesson it should give us is that the pledges which were made this year which is around this year, which is around 55 billion dollars in 3 years, then it should show us that that money is going to be given to us. But if we examine what happened with the first summit, because the words which are being used at this summit, the words that were used at this summit which just ended, they are very similar to the words were used during the first summit. Africa was called a partner. The relationship between the United States and Africa was being referred to as a partnership. We are partners. The United States is not preaching to us. So if we examine that and we see the pledges were fulfilled, then there's nothing to worry about. But if we go around and examine that the pledges which were were made during that time were not fulfilled, then we have a reason to worry. From history, when we examined our introduction to this summit, when we were looking at the summit, we saw that the trade between Africa and the United States actually has been deteriorating, is at unacceptable levels. If you look at our contact with the United States, we can talk of 1619, when the first Africans were taken to the United States from Africa as slaves. It's more than 400 years. Okay, and from the claim of the United States and actually all of Europe, they claimed that they were trading with Africa. We were trading. We sold our brothers and sisters into slavery. That is what they claimed. They were paying us. So if you were to look at it from that point of view, up to now, that contact which we have had together, and then colonialism, when they were taking our resources, of course, also they claimed that they were trading during colonialism. They were trading with the Africans. And so that period of 400 years, our trade should stand at around 4.5, more than $4.5 trillion, Africa and the United States together. If you are using the yardstick of China, China has been in Africa for, officially to trade for around 30 years, and its trade with Africa is up to the tune of $264 billion. United States trade with Africa after 400 years is $64 billion. $64 billion. And so you ask, what has the United States been doing on the African continent for the last 400 years? Or what has been Europe been doing on the African continent for the last 400 years? So when we examine these figures, then it should give us a lesson whether the United States, what it promised, is going to fulfill it. But on closer scrutiny, when we go back to 2015, I pulled up some figure here. If anyone wants, they can find those figures on the United States Bureau of Standards, or you can take, you can call it U.S. United States Census Bureau. In 2015, immediately after the finish of the U.S. Africa Summit that happened in 2014, in August 2014, 2015, Africa's trade with the United States stood at $64 billion. $64 billion. That is at the advent, according to the United States Census Bureau. So during that time, the trade between Africa and the US stood at $64 billion. And the pledges which were made during that time in 2014, it was around $48 billion. $33 billion was supposed to be hard pledges by the United States government itself as a government. And then $15 billion was supposed to be private sector from the United States. And so if you add that figure, it should have pushed our trade to more than $112 billion. Our trade together with the United States by 2016. It should have pushed that figure by up to 100. That is in trade. It should have pushed our figure up to $112 billion. But it did not. It did not. When you go and examine the figures, it did not. And today, 2021, our trade is still $64 billion. So it tells you something there, that somebody is saying things they are not doing. Somebody is overstating things they are not, they are not doing and overstating, or they are doing very little and overstating it. So if our trade right now, after all that period, today in 2021, our trade is still $64 billion, then there's a problem. There's a problem somewhere. Somebody is overstating the figures. And these pledges, which were made in 2014, it's likely that those pledges were not fulfilled. Actually, if you go back even, or to the United States Bureau, Census Bureau, and examine, that trade actually has been reducing even during during Trump's time. The trade declined even somewhere up to $43 billion. Okay, immediately after Obama had left, the trade was already declining, and so it becomes very difficult. It becomes very difficult to believe. And so for us as Africans, I think that this is a lesson that we need to understand the people we are dealing with. We need to take, to pay attention and understand that the people, we are dealing with are double talkers. Okay, so I think that's a lesson right there. And when we go to how nations behaved at this summit, when we look at Ethiopia, for example, and how it handled itself, different nations decided to handle themselves differently at this summit also. We saw how President Nana-Addo behaved at the summit. We saw the Prime Minister, Abiy, also how he carried himself. We saw the President of Zambia, how he carried himself. President Hichilema. We saw President Tshisekedi of the Democratic Republic of Congo, how he carried himself. And what can we learn from all these people, from all these nations? First of all, I would like to commend the chairperson of the African Union, President Macky Sall, for stating clearly the 6 points which he put out there, on behalf of the African continent. And he made it clear, he made our demands very clear, he made our expectations very clear to the United States, what we expect from the United States when you talk about the environment, when you talk about security, when you talk about our energy policy in Africa, what our energy policy should be in Africa, when you speak about food and fertilizers, When you talk about the sanctions on Zimbabwe, he made it very clear that the sanctions on Zimbabwe would not want to entertain continue these sanctions. Africa stands behind Zimbabwe. And when you talk about also the fact that we don't want to bring the Cold War on the African continent, we want to do business with all partners across the world, and those who want to do so, they should compete in whatever they are doing, not compete in what we are doing together, not to come here and tell Africa what to do and who not to partner with, like the United States, how it is passing bills in its parliament, its Congress, like the HR 7311, that bill which is racist to the Africans and disrespectful to the Africans. So the chairperson of the African Union Commission, the chairperson of the African Union, I think made very clear the position. So I think I would like to applaud him. President Macky Sall, he did a very good job. Now, when we go to people like President Nana Addo, before I come to President Abiy, of course, President Nana Addo, we have a whole video is dedicated to his approach at this summit and what happened there. And so I would just go direct to Prime Minister Abiy. I think that there's a lot of things to learn from what Ethiopia achieved and through its conduct at this summit. If you look at Prime Minister Abiy, this is a man who has been struggling with the United States, interference and the Western interference in the country. Ever since there was a crisis in the northern part of the country where we got rebels trying to destabilize the country, which was developing very fast. As we mentioned in the past, Ethiopia, by the time coronavirus came and these rebels came and started disturbing the country, Ethiopia was the fastest growing economy on the African continent by 2020, before the COVID and before this crisis that started. And these guys actually were, came to retard the progress of the nation, which was made. And so, but what can we learn from how Abiy, even with all this, with all this that is supposed to be even a grudge towards the United States, but he was able to carry himself, with grace, with a lot of grace, and diplomatically handle the situation on not only on the continent, but even with the people who wanted to overthrow the government. And we saw pictures, of course, we saw videos. Biden and the Prime Minister Abiy, they were watching, the World Cup together. We saw them, hugging. We saw them laughing, and talking to each other and having, a conversation which you would say that it was an amicable conversation. And so what can we learn from the Prime Minister Abiy? One, which I can pick out, starting, number one, I think that as Africans, for us to respect ourselves, we need to insist on what we want as Africans, because without insisting, we will not be respected as a people. You can see that Prime Minister Abiy was being respected at this summit because he insisted and he said that we want African solutions to African problems. And he insisted, however much the UN tried to interfere, however much the US tried to interfere, however much Europe tried to interfere, in this rebellion, in this conflict that was happening in the northern part, Prime Minister Abiy put his foot down and said, this is an African matter. So even actually the issue of the Ethiopian Grand Renaissance Dam, he put his foot down and said, this is an African matter. And we think that the African Union is the one which is responsible for solving this issue. And he insisted it. So this is a big lesson. That is lesson number one, that when we insist as a people, we are going to be respected. We have to insist on what we want as Africans. If it is our security, and we say we are going to take care of our security, like what the Prime Minister Abiy, insisted, in Ethiopia, that the Ethiopian Defense Forces, they will be able to stabilize the country, and Africans will be able to negotiate and bring peace to the region. It was done. It was done. The African Union actually also believed in him, and the other Africans, in South Africa and the East African region and the Horn of Africa, they believed in him and they rallied behind him, and we were able to achieve this. And this is something which I expect people like President Nana-Addo in Ghana to be doing also. This is a big lesson for people like President Nana-Addo, who has been instead, actually, the Prime Minister Abiy is younger than President Akufo-Addo. He's way much younger than President Akufo-Addo. But this is a lesson President Nana-Addo, who is actually an elder, should be learning. He should learn how this conflict was solved, in the Horn of Africa, in Ethiopia. It should be a lesson instead of creating animosity between nations, creating animosity and going off the line, the official line of the African Union, because the official line of the African Union was already stated. But we see that President Akufo-Addo decided to go off the line of the African Union. So this is a disrespect to the African Union as Africans. Number two, that I can learn. Actually, before I go to number two, I see that lesson of insisting on what we want as Africans. Also, I saw that President Museveni also was able to reach an agreement with the Americans that they are going to finance, the refinery in Uganda up to $4.5 billion. Now, this refinery is going to serve the whole of East African region, because we don't have an oil refinery in the East African region, not a single one. But at the beginning of this process, when Uganda wanted to build an oil refinery and a pipeline, actually when it wanted to build an oil refinery, Total was refusing, and Heritage Oil, they were refusing that Uganda should not build a refinery, that it is not profitable, it is not viable. So the president of Uganda insisted and said that if they don't want to build a refinery, they will not take oil. They will not take oil from the ground from Uganda. And the president asked that, how come that Iran has more than three refineries and all of them are profitable? How and now you are telling us in Uganda, where there is no refinery in East Africa, that our refinery will not be profitable. Actually, when they did a feasibility study, they said Uganda's refinery will be one of the most profitable in the region. But this was through insistence. Now, the lesson here is insistence. What we learn from these two characters, these two figures, these two presidents, from first of all, Prime Minister Abiy and Museveni, is insistence. Now, the refinery is going to be built, and also the pipeline is going to be built, the two of them. So insistence and confidence. So when a leader goes and then he's reporting another country, even to foreigners to the African continent, it shows that somebody lacks confidence, is not sure about his leadership, is not sure about, his confidence he doesn't have confidence in his leadership to be able to work with the regional leaders to solve any problems that come in the region. So that is number one. I'm finishing number one. Number two that I wanted to make, we need to respect our institutions as Africans. We need to respect the African Union. We need to respect our armies. How can you expect the nation to have confidence in your leadership if you as a president, you do not respect the institutions on the continent? We have been crying as African citizens that we do not respect the African Union. We have been crying that the African Union is not doing its work. Okay? And we have been complaining. But in broad daylight at this US-Africa summit, we saw President Nana-Addo disrespecting the African Union. And this is not once. This is not the first time. during the 77th, the 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly, while the African Union was mentioning that we want to be neutral in this conflict between the United States and Russia and in China, we as Africans, this was the position of the chairperson of the African Union, was that we want to work with everyone. We are ready to work with everyone, whether it is the Chinese, whether it is the Russians, whether it is the Americans. Everyone who wants to work with us, we are ready. And we do not want to see Cold War brought to Africa again, because we have suffered this before. These were the words of the chairperson of the African Union during the 77th, session of the United Nations General Assembly. And to re-emphasize this, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of South Africa is also a very big leader on this continent. She came, Madame Naledi Pandor, she came and re-emphasized that. Even when you look at the vote, majority of the African nations, they voted and they abstained or voted against the bill to condemn Russia. So what was the purpose for this? The purpose for this was that Africans were speaking and saying, we want to be neutral, we are ready to cooperate with everyone. If America has its differences with Russia and China, it should not bring them on the African continent. It should solve them from wherever they are, where it wants. If it wants to confront Russia, it should go and confront Russia from Russia's territory. If the United States wants to confront China, it should go and confront China in the South China Sea, and they should solve their problems over there. But they should not come to Africa. This was the clear position of the African Union. President Akufo-Addo came out at the United Nations 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly and contradicted what the African Union is saying. So this is the disrespect to the African Union. And I think that this should not be happening, from a nation, and this is not on Ghana, actually. I would not like to say this is on Ghana. I understand that he's the president of Ghana, but I don't want to put this on Ghana, because Ghana is a great nation, is a pioneer in Pan-Africanism. The Ghanaian people are very strong people when it comes to Pan-Africanism. Some of the best Pan-Africanists have come from from Ghana as a state, that is part of the African Union. And if an individual like him comes and says these things, even though he's the president of Ghana, it makes me question his stand. As a president, it makes me question his stand. And for me, I've come to to a certain level, I've come to believe that his stand actually is not representing, the Ghana I know, Kwame Nkrumah's Ghana, which is a trailblazer when it comes to Pan-Africanism, is a pioneer when it comes to, Pan-Africanism and defending the continent. So that is lesson number 2, that our institutions, not only the African Union, but institutions like the Ghana Armed Forces need to be respected. If you are saying that Americans should come and protect you from people who are fighting against terrorists, actually, they are not protecting you from terrorists. You didn't call them to come and protect you from terrorists. These people have called for help to fight the terrorism. This terrorism, which the Americans and the Europeans have failed to fight. These people are fighting their own, they are finding their own solutions. And one of the questions which President Traoré asked, President Traoré of Burkina Faso asked was that, where has Akufo-Addo been when the terrorists are killing our people? Has he offered any help? He has not offered any help. So they decided to find their own solutions. Where has ECOWAS been? It has been busy imposing sanctions instead of finding solutions to the region. You see, so if these people have decided to find solutions to their problems and you are complaining about them, then why not reach out to them as a statesman, as an African statesman. So this is where the problem comes in. And we say that it is better to respect the institutions, respect the Ghana Armed Forces, because you can't say that a few 1,000 Americans are greater than the 10,000s of the Ghana Armed Forces. So I think that this becomes a disrespect to the Ghana Armed Forces. It becomes a disrespect to the African Union as an institution. It becomes a disrespect to the other African leaders on the continent. And it becomes a disrespect to us as citizens of the African continent, because we expect much more from our leaders. We are talking about African solutions to African problems. This is our newfound narrative. And we have been fighting to unify the continent. And when somebody comes and tries to compromise our position as Africans, this becomes very unfortunate. And we think that the other African leaders have to learn from this. So those 2 points for me are very important. And then the point number 3 is the importance of engaging the continent. Engaging the continent. Even I know I've touched it a little bit, but that is point number 3. I mentioned number 1, the importance, the importance of us respect. One of the points I mentioned, I said that we need to respect the institutions. We need to respect the African Union. We need to be consistent, in our demands as Africans. We need to have our own narrative. Those are 2 points. And number 3 for me would be that we need to engage the continent instead of running around that we are looking for solutions from outside, because we have the solutions here as Africans. It is President Nana Addo himself who has been saying we should not be begging. He's begging for security. He's the one who has been saying Africa beyond aid. So if we are talking about Africa beyond aid, let the words be consistent with actions. Let the words match to the actions. So for me, these are the lessons which we can learn from this. And when you look at people like Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, I think he ticks on all of these 3 points. He has been victorious, and you can see that he's being respected even in Washington when he's talking, because he has been consistent on all these 3 points. And this is the payment for consistency. This is the payment for his consistency. And they will respect you. President Nkrumah was respected on this continent, was the most respected president on this continent, even up to today, because Nkrumah insisted and said the Africans can solve their own affairs. They can solve their own problems. Even during the independence speech, he said that when we are going to show the world that when the black man is given an opportunity, he can show the world that he is somebody. He can solve his own affairs. He can handle his own affairs. These were Nkrumah's words. So in essence, Nkrumah was talking about African solutions to African problems. He was saying that the African, the black man can manage his own affairs. We are going to show the world that the black man can own, his continent and can solve his own affairs. And this is this is the work. I believe this is the work that people like Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, are working. This is the move they are, he's making. These are the feet within which he's making, and the respect for the African Union, which we spoke about, and engaging the region before you move out to speak to other people. Prime Minister Abiy, while there was a problem within his country, inside the country, and he was being antagonized by external forces, the Americans and the Europeans. He didn't go out there to the Chinese. He didn't go out there to the Russians. He came to his fellow African leaders. He came to the region. He came and saw President Uhuru Kenyatta at that time, who was the president. He came and saw, President Museveni in the region. He came and spoke to President Cyril Ramaphosa. He spoke to the African Union. Why is President Nana Addo not speaking to the Africans, and you go and speak to the Europeans? I mean, this becomes unfortunate. You don't respect the African, you don't respect the Africans. You don't respect us as president. So I think these are huge lessons for us to learn. Huge lessons, to learn, from what the Prime Minister Abiy, has achieved. in trying to stabilize Ethiopia. And these are lessons which are transferable to the rest of the continent, to the other parts of the continent. Thank you very much, Mahlet. Let me pause a little bit from there.
Thank you very much, Kwame. Actually, you have touched also our second talking point was on President Nana Akufo-Addo. Oh my God. Okay, so the president of Ghana, and yeah, it just slipped out of my tongue. I like the way how you compare and contrast between Prime Minister Abiy and President Addo. So it really came out good, so that people can see really the difference. Actually, it's like the exact opposite. So it was better to see to analyze the two together. So yeah, I do agree 100% with what you have said. You have laid up, for our for the introduction part, so that we can have an understanding when they say summit, US Africa summit, and trade, and this $55 billion pledge, that actually that money is not there, and how they have been inconsistent also in keeping their words, not because they don't want to give it, but because really in reality they don't have the finance. I think that's one topic by itself for one day to discuss. As you said, you have some interesting figures with us, that you can show us, and to make a presentation really how the US trade with Africa is declining. That will be really interesting for people. People, they think that every time they talk about in millions of dollars, billions of dollars, they think they have the money. And then also, I like the way how you give, all these leaders have their criticism from their own nation, and then from different parts, from the diaspora, also from the same, from their own diaspora outside of the continent. But to learn, to make it even a habit for us to give the credit where it is due when they do good. You have touched, or we have touched upon it also last time when we discussed South Africa. There may have been this, alleged allegations against him, but we need to talk about those good things that he has done. So same is true. I'm referring actually now to Macky Sall, what you have said. Whether they do it or not, we don't know, but we take them for their words. We just hear and we analyze from the deep, starting from the words that they put out. So the speech of Macky Sall is one of a kind that we wanted to hear. So it's good that you brought it. And then as for the lessons, indeed, yes, to respect ourselves, to be consistent. Ethiopia has been really consistent from the beginning, really. So that was important, and to give value and principle, not only talking and being Pan-Africanist. Here you talk, these Pan-African words, and then next day with the next leader you do something else, which is exactly Nana Akufo-Addo, what he did, the president of Ghana. I'm making a mistake with his name. Say it again, once again, please, for
me. I beg your pardon?
His name. I think I made a mistake with his
name.
Yeah,
is President Nana Akufo-Addo.
Akufo, sorry, I made a mistake with the word Akufo. I don't know what happened to me. So yeah, that was really important. And then the diplomacy part, how Ethiopia has been consistently engaged its own nation first. The call was to the nation inside, and then mobilizing the people from outside, also the Ethiopian diasporas or Ethiopians in abroad, and then also our brothers and sisters of Africa and the leaders to engage them. Those are the things. Now let's go to like some of the trade deals, the major trade deals. I think these are the success story of the US actually, as opposed to Africa. So this is exactly what they wanted. We will put a link what we have discussed prior to the summit actually, and Kwame has laid out this is exactly what they are looking for to get the cobalt, the resource for this, for their industrialization, and that's exactly what they have done. Please, I advise you to go and watch it. We will put the link. So the trade deal between Felix Tshisekedi and Hichilema, with Hichilema. So my question is actually now again, our main topic is what kind of lesson can be drawn from this. There are regional organizations, there regional communities like SADC, for in the case of Hichilema, and Tshisekedi, he's a new member now. DRC is a new member for Eastern in Eastern African community, and then the African Union, you know, in terms of creating the Africa we want, has done a very good job by launching the African Continental Free Trade Area, and even a payment system has been introduced. Now, if you know, if you have the information or something that you can share with us, why don't these people really make a deal within the continent? Then they can empower, you know, the leaders, I mean the African Africa as a whole, but also the regional communities. Why not to do the deal, the trade deal within Africa, than doing it to with America or China or anyone, you know?
Yeah. So thank you for that, Mahlet. There is a thinking that in Africa we don't have that in Africa we don't have enough capital. That's the thinking. That's actually the thinking that is going around. But when you actually compound, aggregate our GDP on the African continent, the GDP is around $3 trillion. Africa's GDP, you know, nominal, the nominal GDP. And when you go to India, India's GDP is closely the same, approximately the same with that of Africa. And yet, you hear people like President Museveni going to India and saying that the Indians should come and invest and invest in Africa. So I really don't think that the problem is the capital. I think that the capital is there. We have enough capital. When you aggregate our economies, all of them $3 trillion, we should find a way of investing in each other. But when you look at projects like the Grand Ethiopia Renaissance Dam, you can see that very little was contributed from outside. Majority, almost 95% of the contribution for the building of the Ethiopian Grand Renaissance Dam is money which was contributed by the government and Ethiopian diaspora to build this project. And this is the biggest dam in Africa, 7,000 megawatts. So this should tell us something, that we can do this. We can do this. And this is a dam which is worth billions and billions of, I think it was around, was it around $4.5 billion which built that dam, all right?
Originally it was $5 billion, but now
yeah,
it's
5 billion,
it's
5 billion.
It's going up.
So
yeah.
For you to establish a processing plant to process the cobalt. Now I'm talking about the lithium, for example, which is in Zimbabwe, you know, and the cobalt, which is in Democratic Republic of Congo, and the copper, which is in Zambia. For us to establish a supply chain, we may need maybe $1 billion, like $500 million for each of the lines for us to process, the copper and process the cobalt. This is money which we can solicit from within the African continent. We don't need to go and beg the Americans for $500 million. How much money did they sign, for example, with the president Hichilema? It's not even, it's around $150 million, which they signed. And they will make fanfare out of it as if it is a great, it's a grand investment, is a grand favor which they have done us. $150 million. And they will go and sign the same. I don't know how much they signed with the President Felix Tshisekedi, but I don't think it is more than $200 million. So, but we can mobilize, if you are talking about mobilizing $1 billion within the African continent, without going outside. This is money which can easily be mobilized, and we put up these factories by ourselves, and we process the lithium, make the batteries, from the cobalt, process the copper by ourselves, and sell it to other people who need it. There's no way Europe and the United States can boycott this processed copper. And this again goes back to what we mentioned, that we have to be insistent. We have to insist on what we want to do, and we have to do it. We can decide to process the cobalt, because Congo alone has more than 60% of the cobalt needed in the world. 60%, the reserves, it has more than 60%, and the world has the rest all over the world. So if we decide to process it, they will buy it. They will buy it, and if the Americans don't buy it, they will starve. We will sell it to China. Japan will not reject it. South Korea will not reject it, because all these are making electric cars now. All these people, Hyundai, South Korea, BYD, China, a lot of electric cars are being made in China. China will stop processing it if we process it, because we own it. And we will insist that this is our right. These resources, we have the right to process them. And this money, I know President Felix Tshisekedi in the past has spoken about the Inga, the Inga Dam, building of the Inga Dam, and spoken to the African heads of state. But he has to do more. He has to move across the continent. He has to entice them. He has to speak to them in a certain way and say, this is how we are all going to benefit. And these factories is the same way in which we need to come up, and build them instead of going outside there to be begging. So this issue of trade deals outside of the continent, when they are giving us peanuts and promising, and these things, after 8 years, 10 years, we see that nothing was delivered from what was promised. Like, for example, the climate adaptation, they promised money during the Paris climate, agreement. They promised Africa that they would deliver. The whole Western world, which has been polluting, it has been polluting the environment, the world environment. They have been polluting the earth. They promised $100 billion to all nations that are struggling, the lower income nations which did not contribute to this pollution, so that these $100 billion annually will help them to transition, into clean energy. They have never delivered on those promises. They have never delivered even half. And Africa was supposed to be part of those beneficiaries. And they have never delivered on those promises since 2015, when the Paris Climate Agreement was signed. So it was signed, I think it was signed 2014 or 2015. So ever since it was signed, those promises were not delivered. And they have come to make new promises to Africa. Biden, he has decided to make new promises that America is committing $100 million annually. I mean, in the next 3 years, $100 million to help Africa to adopt renewable energy. And I can bluntly, without contradiction and fear, without any fear, tell you that this money is not going to be delivered. Because the promises of the Paris Climate Agreement, which were made, the pledges which were made, they were not delivered. So why would people like Akufo-Addo go to the same people? And actually, recently, President Akufo-Addo, President Macky Sall, and President Tshisekedi went to Netherlands to attend what was organized as Africa Climate Adaptation Summit. It was organized in Netherlands, and all the Europeans did not show up. They did not show up. President Akufo-Addo went, President Macky Sall went, President Tshisekedi went, and they came back and they tweeted and complained that the Europeans did not respect the Africans. President Akufo-Addo himself, when President Macky Sall tweeted and said it was unfortunate that Europeans invited us to Netherlands and they did not show up to the summit which they invited us. All of them, the Europeans, they did not show up. And this was a summit which was organized for Africa, Africa Climate Adaptation Summit. They did not show up. So how can you go and report your brother to the same group of people who do not even fulfill their promises? So I think that these are the lessons which we can learn, that within the African continent, the resources are there. We have the resources. And what we need from these people is just to complement what we are doing. But we have to take the steering. The investment, we have to stop going outside there to beg for investments. We have to look within the African continent. We have to aggregate. It comes to aggregating our economies and each of us contributing to these strategic resources in each of the regions, whether it is oil, whether it is gas in Mozambique. If Africa came together and each of us contributed 10 million, 20 million, there's no way we cannot put up these factories. There's no way we can not buy these machines. There's no way we can not buy these processing systems for us to process our minerals. Each of the factories, each of the, the industries, the energy, the mining, each of us on the African continent could make a share. Each of the African countries could put some money. Every year we build one industry. Every year, for 10 years, we plan it for 10 years. Each of the African continent, each year has to contribute to this project, 50 million. I really don't think that this is something we can fail to do as Africans. 50 million for each of, for each of the Africans. Okay, let us say approximately $30 million for 54 African states. $30 million. That is $1.6 billion. $1.6 billion. Every year we raise $1.6 billion. Every year we raise $1.6 billion. Each country will just contribute $30 million. This is money which each of the African countries can raise. Each of the African countries can raise this money. And each year we put up an industry, a single industry, whether it is energy, that money we invest it in energy. The next year we invest $1.6 billion in agriculture. This is simply something which can, and over 10 years, we will use our own money without begging anyone for money to invest. So I believe that this is a very simple way in which we can raise money. And if we take that figure actually, and we take that figure to $50 million, $50 million for 54 member states, that is almost $3 billion, $3 billion. Imagine what that amount of money can do. We would not be going outside there to beg money to build the Inga Dam. We would not be begging money to go out there in Congo and build a supply chain, a supply chain for cobalt or lithium in Zimbabwe or copper in Zambia. And they give us huge interest rates. And they are coming with a lot of exploitation, a lot of environmental degradation. And our people are not benefiting. At the end of these concessions, our lands are left devastated. Our people are poor. Our water bodies are polluted. And these are people we are inviting here and saying these are investors. So I believe that a country like Turkey, which is even also making Turkey Africa Summit, Turkey with $750 billion, an economy of $750 billion, should not be inviting Africa with $3 trillion. This is an economy of $3 trillion. So I think that we need to get ashamed. India should not be inviting Africa. We are equal. India with $3 trillion of economy, Africa with $3 trillion of economy, it should not be inviting. These countries should not be inviting. The UK with less than $3 trillion of an economy, France Germany, they should not be inviting Africa, because Africa's economy is bigger than all of them. Individually, all of them, Africa's economy is bigger than them. So I think that this is how we need to start looking at the issue of investing and trade deals when it comes, because the Americans are not going to come here. If they want to come here and invest, they let them come. But they should not make it a condition that to invest here, we have to do certain things for them. No, they should come here because they're going to make profit just like any other business. And we will show them where to invest. This is where you should invest if you want to invest your money. But we should not coerce them. So $4.5 billion, to build a refinery. This is money which can be raised across the African continent. If Museveni was serious across the Horn of Africa and the eastern southern part of the continent, this is money which can be raised around this place. So I think that it becomes very unfortunate sometimes if we don't plan together and if we do not aggregate our capacity as Africans. And this is the problem that we are facing, that you have people who are running in their corner, doing things in their small corner, and then we are all losing. We are all losing, and they are instead destroying. Unnecessary competition is happening on the continent, duplication of activities. So these are things which are affecting our continent. So I would look, when I'm looking at trade deals, I think this is how I could do or go about it on our African continent. So I want to thank you, Mahlet.
Thank you very much, Kwame. I like how you always remind us, Africa's how much trillions of dollars is worth, so that every time when a country summons 55 or 54 leaders of the continent, that they should know their values. This is not knowing their value, because US knows, or the West knows, the voting power of Africa, which I always say. I don't think they themselves know that. What caused this is one of the things is that the voting power that they lost for Russia with the bills that they prepared against Russia. They lost Africa completely, because Africans were either abstained or they said no. I mean, few countries said yes, it's true, but it's totally wasn't in their expectation. So I always say, I don't think our leaders know their voting power. With that also, the trade important points, definitely to have a decade plan. This is also the aspiration of Agenda 2063 puts, until it's a 50 years plan. We have already finished 1 decade, but the things are that all the aspirations are per decade aligned, and countries are encouraged, according to their priorities, to plan to meet those aspirations per decade. Definitely, this could have been something that could have been done in line with that. Another thing, maybe this is the last for our discussion. Unfortunately, there are some countries that have been alienated, not only that they are not invited by the US, but also, originally they are alienated by the regional communities, regional organizations, and then by the African Union, because they say a coup d'etat happened in the country, and others because they don't have a full diplomatic exchange with the US. So now I'm talking about those 3 Western African countries: Mali, Burkina Faso, and Guinea. Now, one of the consequences that we are going to deal because of this reckless statement by Nana Akufo-Addo in their bilateral meeting with Blinken is that he's enabling, I don't know if he's realizing it, he's enabling the Cold War in the territory of Africa, US to face Russia. Now, this will also lead us, I don't think, either the Burkinabes or other, those two countries, Mali and Guinea, will sit down and look, they might also, follow the step and look for help, and or strengthening already what the Russia has a base there, and looking for more help or more military in the region. How can we avoid these things? How can we deal with these things? Because this will be one of the consequences that's going to happen. And
Yeah,
then
I think,
when these countries are, alienated in such a way.
yeah, so the I think the African leaders have to stop being selfish, first of all. um, they have responsibility. They have that responsibility, and I would invite somebody who has much more, who has had experience with these conflict resolutions. The Prime Minister Abiy of Ethiopia. I think that he has to take really a central role on this continent, because his approach actually has been respected in the eastern and southern part of the continent. So I think that the Prime Minister Abiy really has to take, and his diplomats, because I don't believe he did this alone. He has a lot of wise men around him, and so those diplomats, they need to be sent into areas where we have conflicts on the African continent, and they need to engage. And the African Union itself, they need to engage areas where actually now we have tempers which are now are becoming uncontrollable, where we have disagreements now right now, like we have tension between Ghana and Burkina Faso. And so these diplomats from Ethiopia, I believe they can play a big role. And of course, the African Union has to be at the center. It has to, the African Union has to employ a lot of diplomacy, but it can decide to shift, to move and borrow the diplomacy of other countries that have succeeded in those areas. And in particular, I think Ethiopia has done a very good job. Its diplomats have been doing a very good job, and we can borrow help from them. The other thing which I can think of right now is that the African leaders, instead of engaging external forces, I saw not only it is not only Nanado, I think Museveni also attempted to call France into the affairs of what is happening in the conflict, or the disagreement that is happening between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda. He attempted to call France to claim that France should come and help. I really don't believe that France should come in. This problem, we should leave it for the African Union, and we should trust that. I don't understand why the leaders, they don't trust themselves. I don't understand, they themselves as Africans, they don't trust their ability, to solve these problems. These problems can be solved. You have to, the white man, you don't need to bring the white man on this continent. They don't belong here. They don't know our culture. They don't know our ways. And actually, when they have come in, they have made these problems worse. I don't see why people like Museveni should call, France to come and say they are mediating. They should not. Whatever the reason, for whatever reason it is, they should not. They should leave the African Union, East African community, take on the problems. East African community regional force should go in the Congo and wipe out the rebels, while the African Union is bringing the parties that need to be on the table to negotiate and iron out the difference. This does not need to call the United States. This does not need us to call Europe and France and whoever. These people are part of the problem that has been here. So I think that the African heads of state, whether they are hearing me or they are not hearing me, they have to trust themselves. They have to trust our institutions. They have to trust the African Union. They have to trust the East African community. They have to trust the diplomacy, their type of diplomacy, their own diplomacy. And these foreigners, they have caused us so much problems for the last 600 years. We cannot continue to rely we cannot continue to rely our conflict resolution, put our conflict resolution, in their hands. We cannot continue in this direction. We cannot continue to put our politics in their hands. We cannot continue to put our economics in their hands. We have to be strong and solve these problems by ourselves as Africans. The other thing which I can talk about Mali, these countries which were alienated from the summit, we can talk about, of course, you spoke about Mali, Burkina Faso, and Guinea, and Eritrea, of course. And especially, let me first put a little bit of focus on where the coup d'etats happened. I think that the African Union, where it has come short, I know that the African Union in the past few months, it has made some scores whereby it was central to solving the problem in Ethiopia. But at the same time, I think that the African Union, and I would call on it the chairperson of the African Union Commission, who's His Excellency Musa Faki, and His Excellency the chairperson of the African Union, who's currently Macky Sall, who's going to, of course, who's going to give the mantle to different head of state at the end of this year, maybe probably next year. I think that when coups have happened, we need to understand, is it just a coup, or who is driving the coup? We can't just say a coup has happened when people are tired of a leader who has not delivered for a very long time. For example, today, if people rose up against Ouattara and they did a coup, this is a man who amended the constitution and ran beyond the acceptable number of terms in Ivory Coast. So how can you say, let us put sanctions on Ivory Coast because they have done a coup? So some of these coups have been driven by the interests of the African people. And the rejection, we are seeing actually from our analysis as Pan-Africanists, that there is a rejection of France. There's a rejection of France in this area. And they very well know, President Akufo-Addo very well know that France is in this area, colonizing and causing a lot of chaos. All of them know. The African Union knows. So how can you say now, you turn around and you say you are putting sanctions on people who are liberating themselves? I think these things need to be put in context, and the hypocrisy needs to be stopped. The hypocrisy of the ECOWAS, and the hypocrisy of the African Union to a certain extent, and the hypocrisy of the individual leaders, especially in ECOWAS. This is where this behavior has been, appearing and happening very much. That if you allowed Ouattara to extend his terms and amend the constitution without touching him, then you should allow the African people in Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, and whether it's also Guinea-Bissau, Eritrea, to defend themselves against colonialism. You should allow them to free themselves from French control. So I think that this should be the right approach when we are talking about sanctions and exclusion, from summits. Of course, this US Africa summit, even which is not going to be beneficial that much. So this should be the approach, and this is what I would appeal to. I would appeal the African Union to look at, whether it is ECOWAS should look at this. What is the driving force behind this? And we have to stop being hypocrites, and just throwing sanctions all over because there was a coup. Thank you very much, Mahlet.
Thank you very much, Kwame. Really, for that, definitely. And the idea of cross-regional cooperation, I like that, because now they are alienated by ECOWAS. So where should they go? And then at the same time, as a result of that, AU has banned their membership. So probably these countries have nowhere to go, but really to go for a help outside of the continent. So maybe that cross-regional cooperation, meaning, if ECOWAS is not working for them, maybe to ask SADC or Eastern African Community for them to mediate and facilitate things with ECOWAS again. That's, I think, a good idea. Of course, if they hear us. Another thing that I picked is, or I remembered, is that also I have made a video about it, how the president of Kenya, Williams Ruto, went, just visited President Isaias, or visited Eritrea just before his departure to the US Africa summit, and that was really important. So leaders like that needs to be encouraged, to see, my brother, how are you doing, what are your concerns, what kind of things can I bring to the table in the summit. These are really important. William Ruto might represent Kenya, but also, definitely he's talking about a region, about the regional. And that's what happened. Actually, that's what happened. Deals which we did not touch, but so it is important to take their concern as well. What I'm going to do is, actually, we have here our audience, some of them, who commented on what we have been discussing. Barrington Brown said, what we need is organization and management. All we need is ourselves. A promise is a false comfort. They speak with forked tongues. We need nothing from them, but they need everything from us. I agree 100%, my brother. I assume you are a brother. Another one, CNS, brother Kwame is right. There are enough resources in Africa that needs to be directed to the respective sectors. Again, Barrington commented, all we need is financial institution. We have to set up the financial institution to back our currency. Definitely important. Good points they have been bringing. Let me see if there is any questions that you should answer for them. No, I really don't see, but thank you very much for your engagement, for those of you who have been here. I think with that, we end our discussion for today. And also, I think that's it for us, with the series of streaming about the US Africa Summit. We close it here. We believe that we have brought you enough information, and we believe that we have shed light on some of the topics or issues that you may have a doubt or a question that will, at least, we provoke you to go and refer and to read, to do your own research on the subject. That's actually the maximum objective of this thing, to make you read and to do your own research, as we bring you a researched data and information, so that you will be encouraged to do so. Kwame, I will give you maybe 1 minute if there is anything left for you to say, and also to give a final word for the session.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mahlet, for today, for being a great, let me say, moderator, and then thank you for inviting me for this conversation. I would just like to remind people that we have petitions which are running. We are working together with the, PLO Lumumba, the PLO Lumumba Foundation. And some of those petitions, we are not here just to talk and complain, but we have work which we are doing in the background, and we would ask all Africans and people of African descent to support the work which we are doing. Whether you want to contribute $1 or $2, come and reach out to Mahlet here. Just put your contact in the chat or in the comment section. The comment section is down there, so you can put comments, and Mahlet will reach out to you and give you an email where you can send probably your contribution, and let's move together. So one of the projects which we are working on is that we have 3 petitions which we are running together with the PLO Lumumba Foundation, Sister Shanice Show, Pan-African Daily TV, Dr. Susan Dr. Folfak, who is a renowned oncologist in the United States, Ohio State University College. So we are running petitions. One petition, we are calling for a single African government. The second petition is a call for a single passport for all Africans to be issued. We understand that ECOWAS is issuing passports across its region. East African Community also is issuing passports across its region. But we say that that is not enough. During 2014, there was an African, summit. There was African leaders congregated in Kigali, and the African Union's passport was launched. It was given to people like Aliko Dangote and the African heads of state and some diplomats. The passport was supposed to be delivered and given. Those passports were supposed to be given to the Africans. And so they are not giving those passports. And so we want to petition them to give the passports, the African passports, which they themselves signed to and committed themselves that they are going to start doing. We are calling for a single government, a single African government. And that is the second petition. Mahlet will put those petitions in the description and even in the comment section. We are calling for a single currency on the African continent, and we are calling for a single military, so that we don't have to do like what President Nana Addo did to invite American military on African soil. We are calling for a single military on African continent, because we are 1.4 billion people. The African continent, each of us can raise enough military men to be able to protect our continent. We can raise more than 2 million military men, even, more than 1 million, 2 million, whatever we want, we can do it on this African continent. If we aggregate our militaries, we can be able to protect our continent without needing anyone from outside to plant military bases on the African continent. So we are calling for a single military high command of Africa, military high command for Africa to be able to protect the continent. That's a petition. We have a petition on uniting the continent, and we have a petition on a single passport and a single currency. Those three petitions, we are going to put them in the description and the comment section, so that you can sign them. So those are the projects which we are working on, and we are asking you to come and support us as we are working on them together with the individuals I mentioned. We are Connect Africa, and we work with these individuals. So we are open to any help, or if you know anyone who can help us, we are open to that kind of help. We thank you very much. And I think, Mahlet, next time when we are introducing ourselves, we will put it at the introduction, because some other people, they are not able to watch the video up to the end, even though we would encourage them to watch the video up to the end. So we would introduce it when it is starting, in the middle, and even at the end. We can talk about it. Thank you very much, Mahlet, for having me today.
I agree. Thank you very much, Kwame, on that. We have a lot of ideas and projects that we have them lined up. Actually, the petition is one. Also, for a full week, every day, from different angle, but all of them, who will bring Pan-Africanism, who will, which will implant Pan-Africanism in you, or will strengthen, or will shed light, different programs, different projects. But some of the things needs some help. So as Kwame said, we will share whatever needs to be shared to facilitate that next time. But thank you. More than anything, we are happy that you are here, and please, if you like it, if you like what you are getting here, share it to your friend, to your network as well. And everyone, have a good evening. Thank you, everyone. JD Orca at Regmon Music, Yo Up. Thank you, everyone. For being here. Bye bye.
Bye bye, everyone.
Bye.